Welcome back to Night Flight. I'm Judith Kober, and today we are talking to Troy McLachlan. McLachlan, did I say that correctly? Mm-hmm. So Troy, his website is the SaturnDeathCult.com, and he has had a very interesting life. He was born in South Africa, and then later on he was raised in New Zealand. He studied Egyptology, medieval history, and Asian American politics. So I'm very happy to have him here. We are going to talk about the crimes of the Saturn Death Cult today. Troy, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yeah. So maybe we start there first. Who or what in your book is the Saturn Death Cult?
Well, I write about the emergence of an elite-driven worldwide occult culture, and that's important to remember that I term this a culture rather than an actual card-carrying group. There are card-carrying groups that are part of this culture, but it's this worldwide occult culture that is based on what I would call a fraudulent understanding of the mythological record, one that promotes an agenda focused on creating a new and exclusive golden age for this self-appointed elite that is determined to rule humanity effectively as heirs to an ancient golden age that was once presided over by the mythical creator god most of us know as Saturn, but who goes by a multitude of names and cultures, and probably is most infamously known as Babel or Moloch out of the Phoenician cultures. Unfortunately for most of us, however, this Saturn cult, in all its forms and permutations, it has evolved out of various ancient priesthoods and religions to come to promote a culture of total socioeconomic and political control, one that negatively exploits a number of deep-seated psychological scars that are found in the collective human subconscious, in all races and peoples. Now, it's these psychological scars that can be directly linked back to actual and terrifying catastrophic interplanetary events that ancient humanity witnessed and survived in the not too distant past. However, even though these highly destructive interplanetary events have been largely forgotten and clouded over by the haze of our understanding of the mythological record, it's those deep psychological scars that have created that those events have created that are still with us today and are exploited by people with malicious intent and agendas. It's these scars that are with us in the form of ancient mythical archetypes. This is important, goes back to the writings of Carl Jung and identifying archetypes in the human psyche. And the most dangerous of these archetypes are the ones that are centered on the cult of Saturn and the possibility that there is yet another doomsday event. The doomsday event is another archetype that's in our psyche. And we fear another doomsday event like the one that wiped out the ancient mythological world, that it may return to wipe out all of humanity again. And it is this fear of this repeat of a world-destroying doomsday event that has been exploited to allow select elite groups to gain the kind of socioeconomic, the kind of political control that benefits them at the expense of the greater majority of humanity. So I argue in my book, Saturn Death Cult, that the modern expression of this hidden agenda of total control that has come down through the ages has culminated in the modern age with the emergence of the modern central banking financial system, a form of financial alchemy. That is a financial system that has perfected worldwide debt-based slavery and is responsible for all the wars, tragedies, and suffering being experienced in the world today. Now, I know a lot of people sort of find it almost prurient to sort of talk about a death cult in this context, but So a death cult is officially defined as a fringe group that glorifies or is obsessed with death. I take this in my book a step further and identify a death cult as basically any fringe group or any group or agenda that works off a pre-planned program of self-sacrifice and exploitation of others so that a particular group can enjoy success in achieving its aims and objectives. And in my opinion, those aims and objectives in certain elite occult circles are, as I understand it, the desire to bring about a new doomsday event that propels humanity into a new technology-driven golden age that ultimately bestows this technology-driven desire for immortality on a small elite who believe they will rule humanity and the earth with the kind of authority that the mythological record says Saturn is said to have ruled the first ancient golden age, i.e. they will have total power over life and death on the planet while propagating what they believe will be humanity's next evolutionary step, the emergence of mineral man or the star child, this machine-like transhumanist vision of human existence that eliminates the need for procreation or the type of interhuman contact and relationships that most of us believe makes us human in the first place.
Mm. Does that have to do with what we might call that time when Saturn was the sun?
Yes, and this is this is probably the most radical aspect of the book that either turns people off or gets people most interested, is that to explain how this occult type thinking has developed down through the centuries. What we have is a distorted understanding of what is the record of actual planetary catastrophic events and such. And if you don't understand that and understand what's behind those deep-seated archetypes that I spoke about, which act as triggers, psychological triggers for people who know how to use them to manipulate people for whatever reason, then you're going to be victimized by the use of symbols, certain types of symbols that are ancient, ongoing. Once you apply this different cosmology, which radically alters our understanding of the solar system's history, once you have this understanding of this new cosmology, it opens up an avenue of understanding of what the occult really is all about, and minimizes its effect on your psyche. It frees you from the deep-seated angst that comes with having these psychological scars created by these planetary events. The trouble with it, of course, is that it is so massively different to the mainstream accepted idea of the history of the solar system, which posits 5 billion years of slow accretion and the evolution through uniformitarian methods, where our difference is that within human experience, the solar system as we know it has really only been as it is for about the last 2,500 years. And 10,000 years ago, well, about 12,000 years ago, the solar system suffered a cataclysm when it captured a rogue free-floating brown dwarf star. And prior to the capture of this brown dwarf star, this particular theory posits that the solar system consisted only of Jupiter and its moons and the planets Mercury, Uranus, and Neptune. The newly captured brown dwarf star from 12,000 years ago would eventually become the planet Saturn. However, and probably most controversially, Saturn had 2 terrestrial satellite moons or planets, both of which would become respectively the planets Mars and Earth. And Saturn Theory, as it's become known, posits that humanity already existed on Earth at this time when as a satellite of Saturn, and therefore humanity experienced and witnessed the catastrophic capture event of Saturn by the sun and its subsequent the subsequent dismemberment of the Saturnian system of planets. And according to this theory, things would not settle down in the solar system into the familiar configuration that we see today until as late as 700 BC. Some people even put it as late as 500 BC. But it is these events that form the bulk of the collective mythological record. And central to this record is the startling concept that the planet Saturn had once been Earth's first and best sun, and had glowed at Earth's celestial north, where the pole star is today, during a period referenced in mythology as Saturn's golden age. Every different culture has a different name for it, but it's the same archetype, the same concept. And this golden age lasted until Saturn's destructive banishment to the outer limits of the solar system, where it is seen today. Saturn Theory calls upon the concept of the electric universe as a means of explaining how this could happen. And the electric universe, of course, is radically different from the gravity-only system of mainstream cosmology. Mm-hmm. The electric universe posits that the primary force in nature, the force in outer space and so on, is electrical in nature. And this is what governs the way solar systems are formed, planetary, how stars are governed, how they are created, how planets are created. But getting back to your question about this ancient golden age that forms the basis of much of occult thinking and the elevation of the Saturn archetype into some truly horrific renditions of the archetype in the forms of Moloch, with human sacrifice, with cannibalism, extreme pedophilia, all these sort of elements that we are familiar to the occult world. What I like to do in virtually all my interviews is sum it up with a quote by Eduardo Cardona that I have on my wall, who is one of the main theoreticians that developed Saturn Theory. And basically he said, and quote, "The evidence in myth which points to Saturn having once occupied a position above Earth's north polar regions is voluminous. There is not a race on Earth that has not preserved at least one account which states as much. According to this evidence, Saturn occupied a central position in the north celestial regions. It rotated and rotated widely, but other than that, it was immovable." And end of quote. And what he's describing there is what's come down through mythology as the midnight sun, the first sun, what the alchemists call the best sun, and which is such a bizarre concept for most people when reading mythology, because today Saturn is just a pinprick of light on the outer realms of the solar system. Yet the ancients knew it had rings. They knew a lot about Saturn that we only discovered much later with optical telescopes and so on. And they're insistent in their mythology that this body was at the north. Now, this is such a confusion to people who believe that the solar system has been as it is for 5 billion years, and certainly before the advent of human existence on the planet, that the sun has always risen in the east, set in the west, that the planets have largely followed the described orbits that they have today. This is so at odds that they have, how can I put it? They've not conspired, but they've contrived to create the idea that the ancients worship the sun. So many of the ancient gods that you would call Saturnian archetypes, they all have the same concepts about them, have been erroneously attributed to sun worship, when in fact the ancients were very clear it was Saturn. And there's that debate that the planets were named after the gods were created and so on, and they named Saturn after. We can go into that later if people need that qualified. But I'm very, very much satisfied that the planets, as Plato said, when they, as Aristotle, I think, no, Plato or Aristotle, one of them said that the gods were originally stars or planets, and that they were quite unequivocal the body that we call Saturn today was that original sun that glowed in the celestial north at the top of the pillar, the stairway to heaven, this tree of life that extended from the Earth's north polar regions up to what they called the abode of the gods.
Yeah. Thunderbolts project, they have a very lovely documentary about that, Symbols of an Alien Sky. You've probably seen it, I guess.
Yes, yes. Dave Talbot is, the doyen of Saturn Theory. He's one of the original guys. Basically, Saturn Theory, as it stands in the world, I mean, it originated largely with the writings of Immanuel Velikovsky, Worlds in Collision. But Immanuel Velikovsky was more interested in events taking place, sort of in the first millennium BC. Guys like Dave Talbot, Eduardo Cardona, and recently not recently, but in conjunction with them, the electrical engineer Wal Thornhill. These are the guys who have largely developed the model, the electric universe model, that provides the background to this Saturn theory, and gives us our reason for understanding that the events described in ancient mythology are effectively the events as experienced by humanity on a planet that was a satellite of a brown dwarf that was captured by the sun, by the solar system during human history. But yeah, these are the guys. Talbot, Thornhill, both still with us, and Cardona has passed away. There's also Ev Cochran. There's a number of, I'd even put Juno Cook. He's got some different ideas. They all have variations on their theory. I tend to follow Eduardo Cardona's understanding of how Earth and Saturn arrived to be captured by the solar system. But all of them have the common feature that they plumb the depths of mythology, which is a madhouse. And I say this in most interviews. If you try to read mythology in its original form, rather than the edited form where people have tried to make psycho-human drama sense of mythology, we see it in the films that come out, Clash of the Titans, and all these sort of Hercules TV shows, things like that. But if you read it in its original, translated sense and so on, it's almost unintelligible if you think they're trying to portray a kind of quasi-human, anthropomorphic psychodrama. And it only starts to really make sense if you apply this concept that what they are actually describing is a sky that was massively different and frighteningly different to the one that we see today. And that there was a capriciousness about the sky, with planets turning into comets, vast destructive episodes, all kinds of ramifications. We're lucky living in the world we live in today in comparison to what the ancients went through, if you subscribe to this idea of the mythological record being the witnessed account of planetary disasters.
So we also have this season of sacrifice. Some say it starts 19th of March, others say it starts 22nd or 20th. I'm not going to quarrel about it. It lasts for 40 days. It ends on 1st of May. So, and a lot of incidents happened during that time. Oklahoma bombing, for instance, that falls into that season of sacrifice. Would you say that is, and plus all that, the entire idea that we need to sacrifice other people, that hinges on this false belief that the earth needs human blood to replenish itself. And especially these days, where we always hear, follow the science, follow the science. Well, if I follow the science, then the earth does not need human blood
Yeah.
to produce food or
Exactly.
whatever.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. You know, we've just had the century where science came into its own, and subsequently, not I believe coincidentally, it's the bloodiest period of human history. You know, you know, since written records have been about. And the so-called science revolution has been behind a lot of that. I would call it pseudoscience. When you bring up this sacrifice sort of period, this whole concept of sacrifice, it's necessity in occult circles, which itself has kind of taken on a life of its own that is very different from even the original Saturn worship, Moloch worship, this kind of thing, but it's all related back to it. Since writing Saturn Death Cult, it was written about 10 years ago. I've updated it. It's got a new addition to it, vastly updated and expanded. One of the key bits of data that came out after the first publication was by a guy called Peter Mark Adams. He wrote a book called The Game of Saturn. And in it, he provided the link between the ancient cults of Baal, Moloch, Saturn worship that practiced human sacrifice to what we suspect is going on in the modern world today with the disappearance of children, with much of what is going on. And it was in the form of a tarot deck that what's called the Solabusca Tarot deck. It's originally from Constantinople, brought to Renaissance Italy, and entered into the SD family, one of the elite families down through the ages. And what's significant about this is that the Solabusca tarot card is linked by Peter Mark Adams to concepts dealing with the worship of Baal Amam, or this Phoenician version of the Saturn god archetype. And it is vastly different from the idea of Satanism, Luciferism, and so on like that. And the way to explain that is to understand the fundamental difference between, you know, sort of a lot of modern Christianity and even Satanism, the sort of the flip side of Christianity and so on like that, which believes in a righteous, judgmental God. Mm-hmm. All right, they have that sort of concept. In original Saturn worship, the Saturnian archetype is a capricious God that will do whatever it feels like doing. It doesn't need justification. There is no law, so to speak, that governs God, you know, in the sense that, you know, Christianity is sort of, you know, God provides law and is subject to the law himself. It's where we get the concept of the rule of law. Now, the Saturnian God is very different in this, that it's capricious. It can change its mind at any time. And with that concept comes this idea that you can influence to your benefit this capricious God. And the way to influence that has developed down through the ages is to mimic the things that have been spoken about of the Saturnian archetype in mythology, which includes everything from pedophilia to cannibalistic human sacrifice and so on. And in so doing, hopefully you are influencing this capricious God to let you survive when he decides in his next doomsday event.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. All right. You know, when next he strikes, when next he goes from being munificent to the planets and so on, decides I'm going to wipe out humanity and such. So the objective of the occult that worships the Saturnian archetype as opposed to the satanic archetype, the Luciferian archetype of the sort of the Christian tradition, is that he can be influenced, he can be bought off. And the methods are directly tied to what mythology tells us about the personality of the Saturn archetype. And fundamental to that is this concept of a god who was so fearful of his children dethroning him that he decided to eat them all up. It's a cannibalistic child sacrifice horror story. And in so doing, he's then dethroned by the one child that gets away, Zeus or Jupiter, who then frees the children from his stomach. And it is this that has developed into the psychodramas of mythological history that informs occult thinking, informs a lot of the ritual thinking that was developed in the age after the demise of the planet Saturn as our original sun.
Yeah. So now I will read this because I wrote it down from your website so that I do not leave anything out. It says here, there is no membership in this Saturn Death Cult, only participation. How do participants identify each other? Do they just monitor?
It's the ritualistic aspect. This is what I call the grand fraudulent distortion of mythology. It's the method by which you ingratiate yourself into inner circles through participation in an escalating form of ritualistic activity. The lowest form of it are your Masonic rituals, your various sort of, through satanic cults, that kind of stuff. But eventually, as you show yourself willing, and I also argue in Saturn Death Cult, it's a wonderful, because there's this we have this innate prohibition towards murder. We have it, especially the murder of children. We have an innate prohibition towards the sexual exploitation of children. And as a result of that, most of us will not partake in that kind of activity. But in doing so, if you do partake in that activity, you expose yourself to the threat of recrimination from the rest of society, which provides people who would know you've done this with a wonderful blackmail tool. Yeah. And when you have that blackmailable material, that is also supposedly the means by which you climb the ladder into the inner circles of whatever group you are involved in. People will will go along with the program, so to speak, until they reach a certain stage of initiation, which ultimately results in these revolting stories of human sacrifice, child sacrifice, that sort of thing. Now, a lot of people would ask, what would somebody, say a normal person who's just very ambitious, wants to become rich, wants to get on in life, get status, that kind of stuff, what would lead them into accepting the kind of behavior that ultimately maneuvers them into, here's a child, kill it, drink its blood, whatever you want to, whatever the ritual is calling for that particular group. My understanding, thanks to the work of Peter Mark Adams' Game of Saturn, because this was a question I struggled with even when I first wrote Saturn Death Cult, the enormity of such a crime. Why would you do it? The question comes down to this, that if you have a reincarnationist understanding of life, you're you're born again and again and again, and you understand that you can influence the God who determines how you're born and born again. And you're told that this God favors such things as child sacrifice, having practiced it himself with his own children. All right. And you are ambitious enough that you just simply want to, when you're reborn again or reincarnated, you want to be in a better family. You want to be in one of the top families, one of the bloodlines that have, sort of held sway, at least for the last 2,500 years since the founding of Babylon. And these acts, it's not necessarily that you will benefit in this life, but supposedly you've been convinced that this capricious Saturnian god will arrange it so that you're born into the right family, into the right bloodlines at a later stage.
Mm-hmm.
And as the manipulation and the control mechanisms have expanded, as the world has expanded in terms of the size of population and so on, more and more people have had to come in to manage the affairs of this manipulative class of people, that I said earlier on have culminated in the institution of debt-based finance. That's how they really control everything on. And gaining control over these managers so that they toe the line. This human sacrifice, this kind of thinking that exploits their desire for status, for being part of the in crowd. I described in one interview where it just hit the nail on the head. Yes, they know that there's all this bloodletting, there's all this stuff that is gained by supposedly being reincarnated in bodies. Most of us, normal people, are repelled by this kind of stuff. Certain people, they want in on it, and they're willing to do what is required. And basically an industry has developed around that in the modern age. That's closely linked to a lot of the sex trafficking that we see in the world today. And it is unfortunate people are willing to go to these extremes for their own, really what boils down to self-deification.
Mm. So the way I understand this is, we have different secret societies like Freemasonry and Knights Templar, Knights of this and that and what have you, and it goes on and on and on. And usually you have to be recommended, and then you can come, but you're not a full member, and so on and so on. So is it correct to say that the Saturn Death Cult is more like let's say an umbrella?
Yes, it's a culture. It's a it's a form of culture. In the book, I explain that conspiracy is fraught with the problem of gatekeepers. All right, too many gatekeepers that know a secret and people move in. A culture is always a far superior way to manipulate entire groups of people rather than elites operating as gatekeepers and so on. So you need to develop a culture through indoctrination, and the original form of indoctrination that's come down through the age. I've listened to a couple of your interviews with some other people. I can't remember his name. It was the fitness guy and such. His sort of focus on the television and so on like that. This is the modern day evolution, the evolution from what was the grand spectacle of ritual that started in what I call the Silver Age, which was after the planetary destruction of the original Golden Age. And it's through ritual, mass ritual, that we have now with Olympic Games, World Cup football, sporting events, pop concerts, this whole sort of aspect where the application of symbolism, and this is what is the identifying marks of anything that is involved in what I call the Saturn Death Cult culture. It's the use of these key symbols that are tied directly back to the Saturnian archetype and the doomsday archetype in its various forms. It can be the Venus archetype, it can be the Mars archetype. There's so many variations of this, but the culture is the important thing. And I give the example of the military as in the modern age of the nation state to try and encapsulate what this means. And I posit to the person, I say, what people have to understand is that when you create a military, the fundamental culture of the military is almost, what's the word? It goes against logic for many people when I say all military's culture is a culture of love. All right. Now, a lot of people think, how is that love? They go out and they kill people. They're trained to kill. But what everybody knows, anybody who's had anything to do with the military, is that the military trains its soldiers to love their fellow soldier, and they will kill anybody that threatens their fellow soldier. So when you hear about military people, they go for the flag, they're fighting for their country. The reality is, for the average soldier, is that when he's in a conflict situation, it's the guy on his left and his right, the woman on his left and his right, her right, left, who, whatever the configuration of the army, these are the most important, these are the people they have love for. And if you harm them, you're going to turn that person into a killing machine with all the training that they have behind them. So love is the fundamental thing that drives a good military, the love of their fellow soldier, the willingness to seek revenge for anybody who would harm that group.
Yeah,
And
but a very limited love.
of course, yeah. And justified purely by the indoctrination of the military. It's actually a distorted form of love. It is purposefully distorted. And that's why I argue that if you try to understand mythology in a traditional way as a set of human psychodramas, and these anthropomorphized god beings that have jealousies and fights, and who you're going to support, who do you side with, and so on like that, you're going to miss the fundamental distortion in mythology that mythology was originally intended to be. Worded that badly. You're going to miss the distortion of what mythology was supposed to be, which was a record and a warning that the planets are not stable, that the solar system and life on Earth is very fragile, that in other words, as many of the ancients used to say, comets portended the rise and fall of empires once upon a time. It's why comets, we still have that thing. A comet in the sky is a very fearful thing. And this goes back to, the most recent sort of disasters, very much the planet Venus for a period of time was a comet that menaced the Earth, caused all kinds of problems on the Earth. Electrical thunderbolts from Jupiter, these things. They could wipe out the whole of humanity on Earth. And mythology is a record and a warning of these things that has been distorted into these quasi-human psychodramas to provide elites with control mechanisms through symbolism to manipulate the greater majority of us to do their bidding for whatever reason is. And I think that's where you ultimately got to understand probably the most famous creation tale, which is the biblical one in the Western world. That's where you understand that the fall of what we call Adam and Eve, that statement that by the sweat of your brow shall you make the earth yield its fruits. I say in many interviews to people, you've got to understand that after Saturn was dethroned from its position as our original sun, the earth entered into a period of scarcity through seasonal change. And scarce resources, food, that kind of thing, became means by which, if you controlled them, you controlled whole groups of people. And there are lots of people, individuals who sort of hit upon the idea, I don't want to sweat to make the earth yield its fruits with everybody else. I want you to sweat for me so I can have the easy life that supposedly the elite peoples had in the original golden age. And that, so that's the key to it all. They're developing a march towards a golden age where an elite lives a golden age. They live a lifestyle.
Yeah, but only for them.
Only for them, because the rest of us are, and this is why it's a death cult, the rest of us are giving our lives literally to make their world.
Yeah. So in your section on your website, there is a section that says crimes of the Saturn Death Cult.
Yeah.
So, and you talk about the Tower of Babel.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that is, how did you put it? High finance and conspiracy on the plains of China. So can you elaborate a little bit? I mean, most people, they associate the Tower of Babel with a lot of things, but high finance, I find that interesting.
Right. Well, I'll draw upon the biblical record, not as an evangelist or anything like that, but because you actually find this kind of wisdom in virtually all the religions, even the Eastern religions, which is the danger of where money can go. All right, and in terms of enslaving a society. This is based on, let me take you back to the golden age that Saturn ruled, okay? A lot of people believe that paradise is a world where you just laze around, the fish jump into your frying pan, the fruit is always ripe, falling from the trees, you want for nothing, you can sun yourself, you can sleep as long as you like, this sort of concept. But my understanding of what the golden age was that when Saturn was captured by the solar system, the brown dwarf star that encapsulated Earth inside this almost cocoon-like bubble, the bubble evaporated, exposing the world to the outer cosmos, the stars, everything. And Saturn fissioned into a bright sun. And in the Bible, this is called the let there be light moment, all right? And the reason this is important, and all mythologies talk of this moment of Saturn flaring. The Mesoamericans talk about weak raven who suddenly bursts forth with light, from an age of darkness. People refer to it as the purple dawn of creation. And suddenly Saturn has burst forth because the reality of it is, in Saturn theory, it's electrically overloaded by the sun, so it fissions. And that light does something that is the most revolutionary thing that ever happened to humanity. We often get taught that the wheel and fire were the great inventions that propelled humanity onto civilization. But I would argue that the great moment in human march to civilization was the ability to calculate time. Prior to Saturn bursting forth in light and such, the Earth was this uniform, dull world. There was no way, there was no shadows cast, there was no way to calculate celestial bodies on a sort of a calculable track where you could measure time. You couldn't say to somebody, I'll see you next Tuesday, I'll see you in 5 minutes or anything like that. When you went to sleep, you had no idea how long you'd slept. You could have slept for 5 minutes, you could have slept for 5 days. You had no idea in terms of that. When Saturn burst forth in light, humanity was suddenly confronted with this idea of you could calculate time. Mm-hmm. And that is a measure, all right? It's the first measure. It's the first of the weights and measures that would be used to start to develop society. And in the Golden Age, the weights and measures were established, and people understood that weights and measures had to be true. They had to be accurate. They had to be indisputable amongst people for things to work. Now we move on, and that is all lost in the great cataclysm that renders the world into a fallen state, according to the Bible record. The sort of after the cataclysm, you enter into what I call a period of the Silver Age. And the Silver Age is a desperate attempt to preserve those weights and measures. And the one measure that is most important in a world where there is scarcity of resources, and that is the measure of the value of your work. Remember, we go back to by the sweat of your brow, and that if you make the earth yield its fruits by the sweat of your brow, okay, and you produce a surplus, that's got value. The value of that is the work you put in to doing it. The way that is measured is a thing called money. All right. So you know, in our modern day, whether it's I've done 20 euros of work, I've done $20 of work, I've done 20 pounds of work, whatever the currency is that you're using. But money as a whole, you know, one gold piece of work, that's the value of this. And if you give me a gold piece, I'll give you what I have, with the sweat of my brow, made. And so money becomes one of the most important measures of how society operates. And if you control that measure, if you define that measure, you basically have a control over how society operates, how the goods are produced, how people work for stuff, and who gets to buy. You know, the productivity of people who have set to work. So everything centers around money. So I use three things from the Bible to lay the background to what happened on the plains of Shinar or Dura, with this institution of the Tower of Babel, which is based around, and I'll explain how it's based around a monetary system. And that is that in the Bible, I think it's in First Peter, one of the New Testament books, we're told the love of money is the root of all evil. Not the devil, not Lucifer. It's the love of money is the root of all evil, and such. Okay, it's what you also have is another statement in the Old Testament that basically says that you shall not lend money on usury. Okay, sorry. Let me start again. It says you shall not provide diverse weights and measures. Your measurements and your weights measures should be true and accurate. All right. And in between that, the love of money being the root of all evil and providing accurate measures, of which money is one, it tells you you'd never add interest or usury to the loaning or the establishment of money into an economy. This is an abomination. This is what is shared through many cultures, many religions. They all understand that. And it is when you create a system that decides they're going to contravene this law of no usury, that you get what is effectively modern day banking. Because what happens is that measure that is introduced into society is introduced as a debt, all right? And the debt is owed to the people who define the measure of money, the banker, the person who coins the money. If you have that under your control, all right, where you introduce this debt, effectively, if the person cannot pay the debt, which will always happen because you're saying to people, here's 10 units of currency, but at the end of the year, I want 11 back. That 11th unit doesn't exist. And you use that as a pretext to say to people, if you can't come up with that 11th thing that doesn't exist, I'm going to take all your stuff. I own it. All right. All for the work of just simply coining this measure of money and then saying you owe this non-existent extra piece at the end of the year. They complicate things, but over time, there's always a part of society that loses, no matter how hard society works.
Yeah.
And at first, because of our greed, our innate greed amongst ourselves, because of scarcity and so on, we don't care about those people there, 1%. Next year, it's 1.5%. Next year, it might go to 5%. But after about 70 years of this, we're talking 70, 80% of people are struggling to make ends meet to pay that extra fraudulent usury amount that doesn't actually exist in the economy. It's there as a debt. And that's effectively what was created on the plains of Shinar. It was the Tower of Babel, or Babel, however people want to pronounce it, is, when you read the biblical account, it's actually about a city. The tower is simply the governing body of the city of Babel. And a city in biblical terms is a system, all right? And the city that represents the biblical God's righteous system is called the city of peace, known as Jerusalem. The city that is in opposition to God's economic laws is the city of Babylon, or Babel, or what in the Hebrew is the word for confusion. And if you remember, it's the confusion of the languages that destroys the Tower of Babel in the story. The secular world is represented in the Bible as a system of Egypt. All right, so you've got Jerusalem, Egypt, and Babylon or Babel as these three competing systems, and so on like that. Now, when it says about the language, of course, and there's a lot of people that don't agree with this. They think of it as a technology, a way of communicating between people. That everybody had one language and therefore were able to create a system that challenged God. I posit to people that the language in question here should be understood that it is a system. It's like talking about the language of computers. It's like talking about the language of telephony, the language of how to build a building, architecture, that sort of thing. And I go in, I explain how this, in my book, I explain how this is, you look into the Hebrew, that this confusion of language, it's a language of money, a language of a financial system that is becoming so powerful that whoever controls it, as it says, shall be like us, gods. All right. And again, this is the key understanding of what the Bible means by gods, the elves, the things like that. A god is a judge, and a judge determines what is right and wrong. Okay. So the power that this financial system gives you, all right, gives you the ability to say, I'll decide what's right and wrong. I'll tell you, because you owe me all of the interest, all of the debt, I'll tell you what's right and wrong. If I tell you murder is good, it's good. If I tell you, conquering nations of people and subjugating them to slavery is good, then it's good. I am a god. I am a judge. And this is what Eve, in the Genesis account, a lot of people think that the fall of that was that they came to know what was right and wrong through the story of Adam and Eve, eating the apple and all this sort of stuff. But if you look very carefully at it, they knew what was right and wrong already. They weren't supposed to eat of the tree. They had that knowledge that was a wrong or a right thing. Eve's conceit, if you read it carefully, what she's actually saying when she's tempted by the so-called serpent, and so on, and there's explanations for how that works and so on. But what she's actually believing or being told is that if she eats of the forbidden fruit, she will gain the authority to decide what is right and wrong. Mm-hmm. All right. Not that she will know what is right and wrong, but she will have, like a god, like a judge, which is what the word El often gets translated in and means. It's somebody with the authority to judge. That like a judge, she too would be able to do this, and she convinces her husband this is the case. Well, the financial system of Babel is a mechanism, a language that can be used by people to create the power to do exactly that. I'll decide what's right and wrong. You'll live with it because I've got the power. If you don't, I can pay these people to come and kill you if you don't accept what I'm saying. So it has always been the capturing of that measure, money, has always been at the forefront right from the very beginning of these secret societies, these bloodlines, the whole Babylonian experiment. It is through that financial model of debt-based finance that they have sought to gain control and be able to announce themselves as the arbitrators of who lives and who dies.
Yeah. And we also can trace back a lot of religious beliefs all around the world back to Babylon.
Oh yeah. Well, that's where the symbolism study comes in, and you're freed once you realize what Ishtar, which is Venus, means, what Astarte, a version of the Canaanite version. When you understand Marduk and Enlil and all these Babylonian gods, and you also you can also correlate that to what was happening in Egypt, because Egypt was more ancient than Babylon in terms of its establishment of its pantheon of gods and so on, into the Greeks, into the Romans, and dare I say it, into modern Catholicism and modern day Protestant religion. All right. In the book, I try to show people that I call them the Nicolaitans in the book, the professional priesthoods, that again understood that if you control people's religious understandings as much as their monetary understandings, you had a huge control over people to give up their productivity for your benefit. So, the church becomes fat cats, the pastors become fat cats, they demand 10% of your income, because God owns all the gold and silver in the world, and they are God's people representing God on earth. They've taken that authority. This is the Nicolaitan phase that is intricately linked into what I call Mystery Babylon, which is that tradition that starts in Babylon, both religion and ultimately financial. The religious side held sway for 1,200 plus years in Europe, down through the ages. They effectively lost control to the financial element with the arrival of Napoleon Bonaparte and the demise of the Catholic Church, and particularly the Templars as Europe's bankers. And from there, you had the rise of what I call in the book the Red Shield, obviously the House of Rothschild with its banking system. And it's from there that you get this modern central banking system that is the new powerhouse, when the church used to be, in terms of the Western world, used to hold sway. There is no doubt that in Chinese history they've had similar issues down through the ages. Japanese, in India, they've had similar people with malicious intent manipulating their religions for gain, that sort of thing. Africa, everybody. Mesoamerica is classic. I find that the most fascinating. I find it the most fascinating expression of this whole Saturn Death Cult stuff there has ever been, because that's outright human sacrifice on a scale that is so overt in society, so accepted. It's scary. And their iconography is so interesting, and so much more. It's actually a better representation of what actually happened with the planets than a lot of what we get from Western mythology and such like that. But they all have it. They all have these problems. So much so that, as I point out in Saturn Death Cult, when the Catholic Church arrived in the New World during the conquistador era of conquest, when the Spanish were conquering South America, they actually recognized a lot of the ritualistic iconography that was there. They couldn't understand it. They actually thought the natives were, to put it bluntly, were taking the piss. And subsequently they initiated massacres, to sort of teach these people a lesson and so on like that. But effectively what they were seeing was something that had been developed in Babylon as a form of iconography that Catholicism had taken, but was also shared by these people across in another continent, because they'd all seen the same things happen in the skies, and such. All right. And, that's the challenge that modern dispersion theory in terms of history has a big problem with. Why does everybody have the basic same mythological iconography and symbolism? Whether it's the Maoris of New Zealand, where I grew up, the Pacific Island, the Aboriginal, the Southern African tribes. There's this correlation of mythology that is worldwide, and that just couldn't have happened if we'd all been developed separately from each other and ultimately met each other at a later stage, you know, and yet we all have these same mythologies. It's because we all saw the same thing. All the cultures saw the same thing happening in the skies.
Yeah, exactly. So now next stop in the ancient world is Sodom and Gomorrah. And that one was really mind-blowing. You say it was the drug dealing center of the ancient world. And I guess not everybody is familiar with that. No. So why would you say that?
Okay, well, as we all know, Sodom and Gomorrah has become a byword for, you know, what people claim is illicit homosexual activity. We refer to sodomy as the anal sex act that homosexuality is supposedly always doing. And so it was, you know, given to the homosexual, it besmirched the homosexual community with this idea that, you know, God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah because of its evil homosexuality. What we find in the Bible is, in fact, that Sodom and Gomorrah, and it's more Gomorrah, if we go back to what I was talking about, cities represent systems, all right, means of control. Babylon is that financial system in opposition to God. Jerusalem is God's city of righteousness. The Egyptian system is a sort of secular system of opposition to God. Sodom and Gomorrah, and particularly Sodom, the grapes of Sodom, when you look in the Hebrew, is a direct reference to the opium plant, the poppy, the rosh, the red poppy that they have. And it's very clear from the writings of Moses and so on that he identifies this problem as being one that bites you like as if you'd been bitten by a snake and so on. It's a matter of poisoning. It's a matter of you know, getting high on the substance but suffering as a result later. In other words, it's drug abuse is what is going on. Christ, when he was on the cross, is said to have been offered a concoction of the opium plant to help ease the pain while he was on the cross. He refused it.
1 second, I have to stop this.
So, yeah, so Christ rejecting this concoction that was given to him on the cross, this concoction was obviously part of the opioid product that, you know, a lot of people, in those days, it wasn't a powder, it was taken as a drink. And it's very clear from the biblical narrative that Sodom and Gomorrah is not linked to homosexual activity. It's linked to this idea of the grapes of Sodom, the grapes of Sodom and Gomorrah, that which is the poppy plant and this product that it produces that dulls the senses and makes it very difficult to contemplate the word of God in the Bible, and therefore is a bad thing. And the control of that industry that operates on opioids and so on was designated as Sodom and Gomorrah. So it's a system. It may have been a particular center, you know, Medellin and Colombia is the center of the cocaine trade. You know, in modern times, you know, Lebanon was the center of the hashish trade in the 1960s. Afghanistan has been the center of opium for a while. In the Vietnam War, the Golden Triangle was also a center of opium. So this is what is meant by Sodom and Gomorrah, and its ability to destroy people's ability to commune with God and the word, to understand the word of God through the stupor it induces, makes it a target for destruction, you know, in terms of the narrative of the biblical God. So I, you know, argue that that's effectively what was happening there, was that yet another system was being destroyed because of its adverse effect. I also go on, you might have noticed, I'm a firm believer that the story of the siege of Troy, the Iliad of Homer's stories of Achilles and Hector and all this sort of stuff. You know, to me, that was just simply a drug war. That was a turf war between people who wanted to control the drug, the drug trade of the time. And I point out that Hecate, the daughter of Agamemnon, you know, her name was changed into a word that is linked to pharmaceutical as such. And I point out that a lot of the Sodom and Gomorrah with the opioids now is also linked to that whole biblical concept that by their sorceries have they made the nations go mad. And that word sorcery is directly derived in the Greek from pharmakos. And so modern sorcery today, alchemy, is very much the pharmaceutical industry. It's not just the illicit opioid industry. I link it to that wing of what I call Mystery Babylon that makes money through pharmaceuticals and literally the drugging of entire populations. You know, Aldous Huxley, that kind of stuff, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just as a side note, what do you make of the idea that this so-called cross that Jesus died on is a mistranslation of the Greek word stauros? That stauros actually means one pole. There's nothing here.
Yeah.
It's just standing like that. And that the cross actually comes out of Babylon as well.
Yeah, I am a Christian, all right, by profession, but I do not recognize the cross as a valid symbol of the Messiah that I believe in. We go with the cross. You know, the original Christians, it was the sign of the fish was the original symbol, which was really just two words that meant believe. It was the Greek word represented by a letter meaning believer, which was like an upside down U. And when somebody faced you and they wrote their upside down U, the intersection created a fish-like object. The idea of the cross is much, much later as a symbol of what Christ died on. Now, we go with the cross because that's what the Romans did. They crucified people. And crucifixion simply means to die on a cross-like object. But there were various methods of crucifixion. Which one was used with Christ is we're not really 100% sure, but it's not important because in the prophetical idea of the Messiah, it is based on he who is hung on the tree, all right, takes the curse, all right. And so however it was that Christ was going to be executed, it had to be by the means of being hung on something, you know, displayed out to people and so on like that. So if it was a single post, if it was the traditional type cross or a variation, the X cross that a lot of Romans used,
or the tau.
Yeah, all these things. And what's often forgotten is that in crucifixion, it's not the nailing that kills you. It's your lungs collapsing. As a result, suffocation of such and so on like that. And so therefore it's a death by hanging, a form of it. It's not by the neck, but it's a death by hanging. And this is what the Christ endured. And it's up to the Christian of faith to believe what we're told about the nature of Christ's death and how that fits into the prophecies. That's the faith element of the Christian religion and so on. But for me, it's not important if it is that, or if it's that, or if it's that he hung on, or anything like that. It's just important that he was executed in a method where he was hung from what could be true. Some people believe he was just simply nailed to an olive tree. That there's that theory that the Romans really had very little to do with it because they were used as a scapegoat to
get rid of him.
Yeah, yeah, and or even if, as a way of, apportioning blame to someone else, when people said, "Hey, you murdered this innocent guy," and such. But there's that theory that he was just taken out to an orchard and nailed to a tree.
Yeah.
My belief is that he died of asphyxiation, hanging sort of a death, and that they spared his side to try and hurry that process along. But these are matters of faith. But yes, that's where I stand with regards to the debate as to the equipment used.
Okay. So now, after Sodom and Gomorrah, we are going to make a little bit of a jump, and talk about Stanley Kubrick.
Oh, wow, long time since, yes.
Yeah, so we know, many people know this Space Odyssey 2001, famous movie, and they reignited in the movie Jupiter, but in the book, actually, it was Saturn. Right. And I personally think you can see Saturn in a lot of symbolism.
Symbolism is there, yeah.
Yeah, it's been there. I don't know what that is, but when he is talking to the AI, you always see that red round button.
Yeah, there's pure Saturnian symbolism that circles within circles. Yeah.
Yeah. So would you say that a movie is a hidden message?
Yes. I cottoned onto this through the writings and work of a guy called Jay Widener, an American who I've had the pleasure of meeting and being interviewed on his television sort of show and so on like that. Jay is a very up with it guy in terms of modern alchemy and how it relates in, and he was actually my first connection when I started with the whole Saturn mythology sort of thing. It was an ancient thing that happened in the past, but it was Jay's work that impressed upon me that this occult tradition has come through to the modern age. And I completely subscribe to his idea that Kubrick was effectively exposing through a form of initiation to the public exactly what these people in the highest realms believe, what their agenda is. And 2001 is his absolute masterpiece. And my first reading of Jay's stuff was based on what he saw in the film The Shining by Kubrick, which was almost like according to Jay, it was almost like a confession of his role in the faking of the Apollo 11 moon landings and the program that was involved around that. But as you study what Jay says about Kubrick, you learn that Kubrick really gets the bit between his teeth in terms of the subject of pedophilia, and what pedophilia is to these elite types of beings, and of course this is his Kubrick's film Lolita with James Mason, and this began Kubrick's exploration and subtle way of exposing the elites and what they were up to through the medium of film. And he came full circle. I say 2001 was his great masterpiece, initiated into the idea of the Saturn cult and such. Jay Widener has argued that they changed Jupiter for Saturn in the film because it just was getting too obvious what Kubrick was actually portraying in terms of this Saturnian cult that has existed for a long time. After that, Kubrick goes through various films. There's Full Metal Jacket and so on. But it's when you get to the last films that he's involved with, and that is Eyes Wide Shut, and more importantly, AI, that he comes full circle back to the pedophilia idea. And it seems that AI, the theory is that AI, the movie, was just a step too far for the people in control. And Kubrick was done away with, and Spielberg was given the job of rendering that film, you know, sort of inert in terms of what Kubrick was trying to say about where artificial intelligence was basically on the way of creating this transhumanist pedophile-like society. Eyes Wide Shut was a film that was butchered almost to the point of unintelligibility because they recut it so much. It was far too much of a expose of New York high society. And, you know, it's very obvious that it shows ritual sacrifice as part of that group of people. But yes.
Is there something like a director's cut still floating around anywhere? No?
I don't believe so. As far as Eyes Wide Shut and AI, they've managed to subvert Kubrick's original intent and what he wanted to show us, and such. And I don't think we'll ever see the original cut that Kubrick presented 2 days before his death of the film AI. He died 2 days after. And by all accounts, people who were there, he was very nervous when the cut that he presented was given to the executives, and it would seem that he died later. Some people say under mysterious circumstances. And as I said, they gave it to a guy called Steven Spielberg, who we all know of, and Spielberg radically changed the message. But AI is about a 12-year-old boy. It's about a family who loses a 12-year-old boy and has him recreated in artificial android sort of terms so that they have their boy back. But he remains a 12-year-old boy for all eternity, you know, to the point that he's discovered many centuries into the future by aliens. That's the, you know, sort of the climax of the film, that this AI intelligence survives in this boy. But Jay asked the question, and I totally agree with him, which group of people, criminals basically, would love the idea of having a boy that stays 12 all his life? And that is a pedophile. They don't want to see boys grow up into men. Mothers want to see their boys grow up into men, want to see their daughters grow up into men, fathers too, and so on. But pedophiles, they would love a child to remain a child all its life. And this is why AI, the film, was almost full circle from the film Lolita and Kubrick's, you know, canon of films. And you get that sort of journey with Kubrick right up into from Lolita to AI. But yes, 2001, that's the great initiation, where Kubrick is essentially telling us that since ancient times, and he goes right back to, you know, primordial, you know, sort of caveman times, and he brings it all the way forward to the space age in the future, that the next evolutionary step is this move into becoming the star child, the mineral man, that technology bestows a kind of an immortality on human consciousness. You know, and so therefore he was effectively warning us, and I believe he was warning us. I believe Kubrick saw too much, and it scared him. And he was warning us about this transhumanist agenda that has been accelerated around the world at the moment, in this attempt to create this new golden age star child concept, you know, that we've discussed earlier with regards to mythology.
So would you say it's a fair assessment to say they are fighting for their freedom,
You
the
mean
self-appointed elites. And while they are doing that, no limitations, merging with the machine, full control, and so on and so on. And while they are doing it, they are enslaving everybody else.
Yeah. The enslavement factor is because to achieve what they're trying to do, this transhumanist machine-like technology of the future, they need to harness the productivity of people who have the talent and the work ethic to build towards that. The people who are involved in this sort of stuff themselves are not very clever. These are not geniuses, and particularly the modern variety. I often say to people that, your financial elites today are not your Jacob Rothschilds of yesteryear or anything like that, or John D. Rockefellers or any of those usual suspects. There seems to have been a degeneration, like happened in European royalty through inbreeding, this kind of thing. The same thing seems to have overtaken, so that we're now beset by the likes of the Clintons and the Bushes and these sorts of characters that aspire to levels, who have inherited the process but are not of the quality of the villains of the past, so to speak, and that they're very substandard. And so they need the ingenuity, the intelligence of the average population that we have in the capacity with. They need that to sustain their objectives. And the only way they can do that is, I argue, by putting us into debt slavery, in which case the most brilliant of us, the Teslas of this world, and something doesn't quite sort of come to mind, but Alvin and some of these great scientists, these breakthrough scientists that we've had, even going back into the way they co-opted people like Da Vinci and so on like that. They have to keep these people on a financial leash, doing their bidding, and so therefore it has always been the control of the financial system. There has been the methodology by which they maintain this control.
Yeah. So now comes a subject that I rather not talk about, but it has to be addressed, and that is child trafficking and child sacrifice. What is so? Do they really believe a younger human being is doing a better job for them for bribing Saturn, or what's going on here?
It has been that. The original concept is the firstborn of a family. Okay. All right. And the reason for that is, so Saturn's authority was challenged by the arrival of his children. So he decides he's going to kill them all and eat them. This is the mythological record that inspires this sort of concept. That morphs into the idea that Saturn's heir and firstborn becomes Zeus or Jupiter, the guy who comes and knocks Kronos Saturn off his throne, steals his rings, and becomes the king planet, the king god that rules the pantheon of the ancient world after Saturn is killed effectively. So regicide is a factor that is identified with the arrival of the firstborn. So if you are somebody who has established himself as in a leadership position, you fear your firstborn, and you look to the example of Saturn in mythology on how to deal with this, and so you sacrifice your firstborn, and it has the double effect that he's not a challenge, or she in some cases is not a challenge to your authority, because they're dead, and you've done that, and Saturn, who was banished but never really died in their understanding, and so looks favorably upon this practice. And of course, this is what developed into the cult of Moloch, the cult of Baal, in the ancient Middle East, which is probably the most frightening version of Saturn, and is actually undergoing a tremendous revival in the world today, as a for various occult type people. And as I explained to you, this is very different from Satanism, very different from even Luciferianism. This is nothing to do with about being judged by a righteous God or anything. It's everything to do about influencing that God, that creator God, into being favorable towards you, as opposed to other people when he decides to cut loose and do something destructive again, as such. And it's also about appropriating his authority to yourself, making yourself an heir to him. You're emulating him with the destruction of your firstborn. So it was originally the firstborn that were sacrificed, okay? And the current thinking, so much of what we have today, it's a little bit like Christianity. It's very hard to see the original Christian concepts in a lot of what we see in the churches today. All right, and it's actually the same for a lot of the Saturn worship. So your garden variety Satanist and so on like that. A lot of these guys are making it up as they go. They get basic concepts. They start something by doing it. It builds upon. It creates a life on its own. Classic example is Aleister Crowley, the formation of Thelema religion, which was based on Egyptian versions of the things that we're talking about. They tend to, when Jeffrey Epstein was busted and they went to his island and so on, they had that funny temple, which had the Egyptian stripes on it with the dome on top. It also had a couple of statues, golden statues. A lot of people thought those were owls based on Moloch worship. It wasn't. It was Thelema worship, Aleister Crowley's. That's been the, Thelema's been the go-to celebrity religion for quite a few decades, ever since the Beatles stuck Aleister Crowley in one of their albums on Sgt. Pepper's. And, so these are all almost, make it up as you go type expressions of this one basic idea. If I sacrifice something of worth, I get a benefit in the future. And I think that when it comes to children, it is that innocence in the child that has, problemated this idea of we've heard about the sacrifice of the virgin. All right. Well, nothing gets more virginal than a very young child. There is another factor involved, and that is also the way it serves to brainwash, to break the personalities of children when they see this stuff. So wherever you get sacrifice of a child, it serves the purpose of also traumatizing other children. They witness this stuff. And in so doing, you get to mold them into various, personalities. This is where the symbolism of the broken shards of a mirror, the multiple personality disorder concept comes in. Traumatize a child under the age of 5 and over the age of 2. And you can mold that child into virtually any personality or multiple personalities that you want. And, that's the practical application of a lot of this going on. You build an army of people that grow up, into psychological slaves. So you've got that aspect also to look into it. There's the talk of adrenochrome, the idea of harvesting that when a child is traumatized, they produce this substance in their blood that is very beneficial to people seeking, age renewal and things like that. I'm not personally sure on the science of it or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I think I go so far as to say that if they believe that this could work for them, they're going to do it. And such, that's the danger of all this stuff. It's not so much does Satan exist, does Saturn exist, all this sort of thing that comes into it. It's that the danger is, do they believe that this approach to worshiping Saturn, Lucifer, Satan, whatever it is that they have, do they believe that this approach is going to be beneficial to them? If they do, then they are very frightening, very scary people. And I think that's a lot of what goes on. But children are so vulnerable. It's difficult to get well-adjusted adults captured into systems like this. And it just gets worse and worse. You hear about farms and now breeding children, for precisely this kind of thing. Why drag them off the streets and risk being found by normal society? Let's create a farm and breed them. This happens in Africa with the upsurge in a lot of the human sacrifice for financial gain that we're seeing in Central Africa. I believe it's starting an upswing in Central America. I believe that the elites of the United States and Europe have been doing this since the Renaissance times.
You know what I just thought when I listened to you? That these self-appointed elites, when I hear that, what comes up in my mind is they are a bunch of heartless, stupid, and superstitious people, and they have this drive to throw their superstition on everybody and make everybody's life miserable.
Yeah,
by doing.
They're psychopaths. They're psychopaths. They're clinical psychopaths. They have no constant. They have no. They have no capacity for empathy. They only see the world in terms of what it can do for them. And if they're told that there is a God that is responsible for creation, who will look favorably on them if they do these things, they won't apply logic. They won't think in an empathetic way to the rest of us. That whole Christian ideal of do unto others what you'd want done to yourself. They're quite happy to do unto others what's necessary to get what they want for themselves, and that's a psychopath. And I've heard it said, while narcissists are made, and narcissists are also very dangerous people to come into your life, psychopaths are born. They are a segment of our population, less than 10%, maybe less than 5%, but they are the most dangerous in the sense that they will never hesitate. They never think of the consequences of doing what they feel is right for themselves. That's the only thing that justifies it. If I think that this is going to be beneficial to me, I'm going to do it. I don't care if a whole city dies as a result. Of people. I don't care if my family have to be pushed off a cliff, or taking it back to what we're saying, or if I have to sacrifice my firstborn. This is the nature of the psychopath. And yes, I believe that their inbreeding and their marrying within bloodlines has refined a psychopathic genetic trait into certain families down through history. And every culture has these families. There's the Chinese version of it.
Xi Jinping, he is a member of the triad, and the triad has also to do with the bloodline, and the triad, that their secret society, that is a mixture of Freemasonry and mafia.
Oh yeah. Chinese history. I lived in China for 15 years, and you learn a lot just by living amongst them, in terms of what family means, what society means. And the Chinese have this capacity. I was told by one Chinese person that the Chinese might be the most populous people on the planet, but they boil down to 7 families. And if we're going to pinpoint a family, name names that is on a par with your Rothschilds and these classic elite families that have come down through the ages, the House of Este and the Saxe-Coburgs and so on, these types, the Li family of China, which, is, there must be 300 million of them. And I would say that 299,500,000 and something thousand have nothing to do with any of this, whatever the factor is. But that family is very dominant, in Chinese culture. The Japanese have families that are very dominant. In fact, you can find it in virtually every culture, every tribe, every group of people that form a nation.
Have you ever stumbled on evidence that those bloodline families even, let's say, sacrificed their own firstborn, or at least drag them through a program where they distort the personality and then build a couple of altars?
Right.
Have you seen something like that?
No, and to be honest, I wouldn't want to. It's something that once it's seen, you cannot unsee it. The suffering of a child. You hear about police officers who have to look at the material that's been put up on the dark web with regards to the violence and abuse given against children. And, these are normal, well-adjusted men and women who need huge counseling after even just 3 months of investigating this stuff. I don't want that in my life. So I don't seek it out. What for me is important is that I have seen the evidence in ancient times for it. That's indisputable. All right. The altars at Carthage, the child cemeteries, and so on. The writings about it. There are constantly, people try to downplay it, but it's there. The biblical account is unequivocal that this was happening amongst the Israelite elites. Not just the Canaanites and the non-Israelite peoples, but the Israelite peoples had a propensity towards this as well, sacrificing the firstborn, pedophilia, that kind of thing. And it's mentioned many times in the Bible as a factor that is, recognized by that document in time. So ancient-wise, there's so much evidence as to be stupefying that this kind of thing was going on. In the modern age, you hear stories. To go and investigate that, you run the risk of almost being implicated in being involved in that kind of stuff. So that's a very difficult thing to really, go into. And I'm happy leaving with the authorities. I have known people when I was in New Zealand who worked with New Zealand Customs who had seen evidence of not elites in the European side of things, but effectively a cult of islanders who practiced some of this and made a video of it and so on. Which you could say is a one-off or whatever, the thing is, but there was the evidence. What was important to me in understanding this was when Peter Mark Adams, with his book, The Game of Saturn, made that link between the rumors of in the modern age with the facts that we know of the ancient world, linking it with the near-modern Renaissance world, that you have these families that have a tradition of propagating this kind of thinking in terms of their art, in terms of their what they what's the word, what they commission people to create in the form of tarot card decks, that kind of stuff. Peter Mark Adams doesn't know whether or not they followed through on taking a child and immolating that child for the purpose of sacrifice. It's just there in their dark magic. These people practiced magic, what they call attack magic. They believed it. So you can only assume that when things aren't going well for you, when you're just doing a symbolic ritual, the next step is, well, if I'm not getting the results I want from just, you know, stabbing a doll or something like that, let's get the real thing in, you know, and see if that gives us a better result. So it's logical to assume that somebody somewhere in these elites are doing this. They certainly have the artwork, and they have the commission history, and they have the sort of hidden histories that come to light every now and then pointing to this. And you know, I'm a great believer in one police officer who was asked about snuff pornography as a medium, and his answer was, "Let me tell you, if they can imagine it, they've done it."
Oh yeah.
All right. And you know, it's I think the most frightening thing in the world, I you know, I have no doubt that snuff pornography exists. There's too many police officers now who've come out and said they've had to work on it, they've seen it, and the effect on them has been devastating. So I have no doubt that it's there. To me, the horrifying aspect about it is that we've entered into a world where in the past, and this is no excuse for the elites of the past, they're trying to organize something. They're trying to influence something, all right? But we've entered into a world where this has now become entertainment. It's become a form of entertainment that can provide an income and such. This is how low these people are going in the modern age, where you know, it's now, you know, for them Saturday night at the movies.
Yeah.
But
And
no, I've never seen anything myself. I worked in the film industry, and I've seen things that people talk about in terms of sexual exploitation and so on, that led me to believe that's what was, you know, predators working their tactics on people, vulnerable people. But no, I've never actually witnessed anything by elites partaking in that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So in your section, the Minotaur and Black Dahlia Avenger, you say something that I find very important.
Yeah.
That is, the death cult is not the sponsor of a particular conspiracy, but the sponsor of a culture of murder in which conspiracy can thrive.
Yeah.
And I think that is a distinction that we all should take home.
Yes, because when I got onto the Black Dahlia killing, that affected me as a teenager when the film came out with Robert De Niro in. I can't remember, for some reason I can't place that film, but it was sort of based on the Black Dahlia killing. And anybody who's seen the autopsy photos and the crime scene and so on, what that woman went through was, you know, just beyond unbelievable that somebody could perpetrate that against a human being. And it was the writings of Dave McGowan who wrote about Programmed to Kill, all this idea that we're being manipulated through, you know, he introduced me to the idea that the plague of serial killing in the world is really an organized program to force us into accepting ever higher degrees of the police state and so on. And the Black Dahlia killing, he described it, and I think I put it there in the article. You know, as he said, ritual crime is never pretty. And when you see the photos, it just it's terrifying what happened. So I looked into it because of the ritual element to it. It was obviously a ritual. But what I found was that the guy that I now believe is responsible for that killing, which is the father of police homicide detective Steve Hodel, is a guy called George Hodel, who I subscribe to being the main suspect of. In his life, Hodel is a what do they call him? I have forgotten the word. It means a hater of humanity in general or something. Not a religious man, but ritual through art. In other words, ritual becomes his art. And that just struck me as yet another modern permutation of what is based on this capricious God that really, at the end of the day, just lets you do what the hell you like. You know, as long as you're successful, as long as you're able to do it in such a way that you know, benefits the god, so you get favor and so on like that. Now, I don't think George Hodel, the suspect in this crime, had any concept of Saturn, Moloch, or anything along those lines. But he was part of a culture, an artistic culture that derives itself from that. And the key to it is understanding where the imagery of the Minotaur, the destroyer of maidens, you know, the bull god, which, you know, Moloch is the great bull god. The Minotaur is the hybrid son of a woman and a bull. It represents the, you know, the horned god of the ancient times that you sacrifice virginal men and women to in the labyrinth. The labyrinth is life. We all walk the labyrinth of life, hopefully avoiding the violence that the Minotaur represents. And this is all very much Saturnian thinking, as much as it is, you know, quasi-religious and so on. So the art movements of surrealism, Dada, and so on like that, even down some pop movement, it's almost as if what influenced the art iconography of Saturn worships, the Saturn cult, in things like the Solar Busker tarot cards and things like that, it's evolved into a lot of what you see in modern art, the dismemberment of women, the you know, the outright violence towards women, and particularly in surreal art, that you see that is. And, you know, as one guy put it, George Hodel was not a very creative person. He loved these surrealist artists, but he wasn't on the par creatively with them. And I think that Steve Hodel is right in saying that his father tried to do them one better by saying, you paint it, I'm going to do it for real. And he produced a meat sculpture in the form of the victim, Elizabeth Short. Mm-hmm. And, you know, this is the world that we live in now. This is where people have the, you know, have come to. You know, the Marquis de Sade in his writing is venerated by these people. You know, anything that is viciousness towards humanity is applauded as an act of freedom. You only have to read. Sorry about this, but I do mention them in the article. It's the guy who wrote Confessions of an Opium Eater. He writes, you know, murder as one of the fine arts. He writes a whole discourse that the act of murder could be seen as an act of art. Mm-hmm. Well, that's what ritual always was. It was art to impress upon the masses.
Yeah, and when I think of, let's say, Marina Abramovich, the filth that she is producing, unbelievable. That is even considered to be art.
Yes. Again, it's an ethos. It's an ethos that says art is what I want it to be, rather than an expression of creation.
Yeah.
You know, art has always got the debate. How much do we allow people to be free in art, and how much do we clamp down on what is the obscene, what constitutes the obscene? And I think, you know, being somebody who's always worked in the arts, whether it was the music industry, the film industry, I even had a go at painting myself and so on like that. You want a freedom to express the what you're thinking, but you've got to be so careful. What is it that is actually influencing your thinking? And I'm finding a lot of modern art is in the same way that Catholic iconography was influenced by what was going on in Babylon. Mm-hmm. Modern art has taken that that violent approach. I'll give Picasso his dues. When he went into the caves and saw the paintings in the caves, the famous animal paintings and that. And he came down and he said, we've invented nothing. They were doing great art, back in the Ice Age and so on like that. When, he said that if you look closely at Picasso's art, there isn't the violence that you see in a lot of subsequent art that typifies the surrealist movement. The surrealist movement is unbelievable. The dismemberment of women is everywhere. It's an obvious hatred. It's a male hatred of women that's been expressed in that, and that goes all the way back to Saturn and his personality. I think there's a lot of terrible stuff in Renaissance art that is often portrayed as great art, but what you're actually seeing is the propagation of cannibalistic murder. And people think it's great, but it's a difficult debate.
Yeah. So the last, let's say roughly 1.5 years have been very interesting, to say the least.
Oh, yeah.
And do you think that this pressure that is being built up so that everybody has to get the double needle craft, do you think that entire agenda is tying into that?
Yes, very much so. I believe they have always been building up to that. Some people will scream in disbelief in me saying that Donald Trump was a massive spanner in the works, and they're now on an accelerated timeline trying to catch up in terms of manipulating the world into a situation that they have long planned, which is basically the culling of the planet down to a manageable number. We are so many now and we have a device that the only thing comparable to the device that we have today to fight what's going on in history was the invention of the printing press, Gutenberg's invention. And the internet has given us the same capacity to fight the powers that be that allowed people during the Reformation to fight the dominance of the Catholic Church and its power at that time. Subsequently, a lot of that itself fell into disrepute, but it was the printing press that gave people a tool to fight. The internet is the printing press on steroids beyond belief. Look at what you and I do. 20 years ago, you and I would never have met. We would never have known anything about each other. We'd never be able to have this discussion. We would never have been able to put it out for people to come and listen to what we're talking about, make their own opinions and so on. It was locked down by the corporations and so on. So they've lost control, and there are so many of us now that they know that if they don't reduce us to a level that's manageable to them, we'll overwhelm them just by the sheer numbers of people who will not accept their self-appointed position of I'm the heir to the Saturn legacy and so on, that I want my new golden age and so on like that. So we know what these people want to do. It's there in the Georgia Guidestones. They want to reduce us to 500 million. And it personally is my belief that they've tried genocide, they've tried war, and so on. This has been an attempt to effectively sterilize a generation. I think that's it's not the COVID thing that was the problem. The COVID thing was to get us to take the vaccines.
Yeah.
And that's where some of the problems might expose themselves at a later time in terms of what they're trying to do. I'm actually very I'm very optimistic about the future. I'm not one of these people who believes that they have this total control. I see panic. I see things happening that if they were in control, this would not be happening. This would not be discussed. This would not be seen to be the case. And most importantly, I am seeing the destruction of the central banking system and such, because that's the engine of their control. They pay to be in control by defining money as the means, to determine what the worth of everything we make is, and then through debt they have a claim on taking it off us. You couldn't pay the interest, I'm taking your stuff. It's called foreclosure. But I think their system is on its last legs.
Oh yeah.
I think there is genuine panic. I think the shouting and the screaming that you're hearing from them, the desperate attempts to make us mask up and conform, is an indication of how out of control, and they're not ready for their great reset to actually happen.
No.
And I believe the world is going into a jubilee that will destroy these people once and for all. And I think we will learn that we will never allow a central banking system to ever operate under debt-based principles ever again after this. We'll have sound money, and that sound money is already here. It's called cryptocurrency. Cryptocurrency is undoubtedly, it's issued without interest. It's decentralized. I don't need a bank to operate it. I just need the internet and connection to like-minded people in terms who are willing to accept it as a value, as a measure of the work I do. And that's great.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of cryptocurrency.
No, you're a gold-backed person?
Yeah, but it's not that I own a lot of gold. First of all, any financial product that takes more than 10 minutes to explain it to me, I'm not interested.
Okay, yes.
Yeah. And
well, my explanation is it's the first currency in 2,500 years that is not issued as a debt.
Yeah. And then also what is connected to it, blockchain. The two words block and chain do not sound
Right.
to me
I understand.
like human freedom.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of it that way, but I see what you mean. Yeah.
And plus, yeah, fiat money. That was always the term being thrown around for years. And yeah, the one world currency, it will be digital. And then Bitcoin came, and in the meantime, we have a lot of other cryptocurrencies. And everybody jumped on that bandwagon. Yeah. And so it's still fiat currency. It's not backed by anything.
Yeah, it's only backed by faith.
Yeah.
In its ability to be a representation. I'll never think of the term blockchain again in the same way after what you've just said, and so on. The slave block and the chain and so on like that. But I do believe that the blockchain represents an accurate measure. One that everybody can audit, and that's so important. The problem with central banking is that they don't allow us to audit. There's no way to audit really what's going on with these people, and they can put this false measure out. My personal belief is that cryptocurrency is exactly that. It's a currency, and that money is whatever anybody wants to accept as payment for their productivity. Okay, so I may accept from you a crate of beer for payment on something that makes that beer money for that transaction. So it's just simply a currency. My personal belief is that we will ultimately be going in some way into a silverback currency. Not gold will play a role in it, but I believe that silver will become the metal of denomination, and that it will be tied to productivity, and we will enter into a system that resets itself every 49 years. And crucial to that system is that land there will be no speculation driving up the price of land. over that 49-year period. In fact, land will come down. Land will always be valued according to its ability to produce food, all right, over a period of time. So, how many bushels of grain can this land produce for the next 49 years is the value of the land at that time for 49 years, then it's for 48 years, and so on down. It's less grain as you get closer. You get a reset at the end of that. And I think we're going back to ancient concepts where rather than land ownership, it's land custodianship. And so therefore the land's productivity is of precedence and not its speculative value, that is governed by this false measure, fiat currency based on an interest-based system. So that's my personal thing.
Bill Gates buying up all the farmland.
Yeah, because you see, these guys, they believe in ownership of something they didn't even create. All right. The ancient concept of ownership was you own what you create. So philosophically, Schopenhauer used to say the only thing that humans actually do, like the concept of God being the creator, is we create stories and music. All right. These are things that come from without us, that we create like a god. But not one of us has ever created a tree, a planet, or air, gas, or anything like that. We just use what's already there and such. So the ancient idea of God is not based on something awesome in the skies and so on like that. The ancient idea of God is that God is whatever created that which sustains us and so on, okay? And the beneficence of God is that we are allowed to utilize that resource for our survival, for our belief. But nobody owns those resources. Nobody has God's ownership of those resources. That always stays with God, and God always allows us to have access to it. This is the true nature of godship in the ancient sense that has been distorted by the, what I call the Saturn cult, where they've tried to monopolize the resources of the world for their own benefit. And so we've fallen for this ridiculous idea that you can own the land in perpetuity through the purchase of a thing called money. And of course, as I've been arguing the whole time, if you control that money, you get to purchase everything for yourself and say to everybody, now I own it. But the old way was, no, we all have access to it, and you're a custodian of a certain piece of land that you can work for a generation. You can sell along during that time, but it all resets. It's the old Persian way of sort of resetting, the true idea of a great reset. They did it every time a new king came on the scene. They started fresh. Biblical concepts is every 49 years and so on like that. There are variations of this. It's a better system. It stops land speculation. It stops people being dispossessed of the ability to feed themselves because they can't go on that land and farm it. They can't enter that forest and use its resources and such. It also means that people develop a greater respect for the planet as a resource, rather than just simply as an ownership, a token of status based on ownership.
Is there anything that you would like to add in when it comes to the subject, the crimes of the Saturn Death Cult, that we have not talked about, but where you think it is important to mention it?
Well, I touched on it a little bit, but before, the Saturn Death Cult is about control over resources. And the way you create that control is you have everybody cede control to a central authority, rather than people existing in a world where they operate, person to person, with an ethos of, I'm not going to do to you that which I wouldn't want done to myself and such. Okay, They believe that there should always be a third person who determines how you deal with that other person. So you and I want to go into business. We've got to get permission from this third party to do that. All right. That's the world they want. Yeah. So they need to scare us into a position where we are constantly afraid of something that makes us go, yes, make these laws that cede more and more power to centralized power bases. And wars have done that, the nation state, but I think things went into overdrive. I honestly believe that the serial killing plague that we have seen around the world, that probably a third of the serial killers that we've seen arrested, put into jail, these are fall guys for what is an organized activity on the part of the intelligence services working for governments, where they have been trying to scare us into accepting new, more draconian police laws. That morphed into the war on terror. The war on terror will become the war on the unvaccinated, it seems we're about to go into. And eventually it will be the war on the alien race that we're supposedly all going to be threatened by at some point in time. And that will be used once again. You've got to buckle down. I am optimistic they've blown it. They've blown it with this coronavirus nonsense. Their credibility is shot. It's imploding for them. I almost think there is a spiritual aspect to it, that they've had their time and the time is up. And, there's nothing they can do except scream and shout and carry on.
Yeah,
but they
lash out.
Yeah, that's all it is.
Yeah.
And I think a more spiritual, greater humanity is about to take over the reins and look to what I call the Silver Age, where equal weights and measures, true weights and measures was the actual, the most important thing to those people in terms of governing society. And I've argued that I believe that the Great Pyramid of Egypt was that great monument. That it is a code of weights and measures that has stood to say these are the measurements, these are the weights and things that we use. It's not a burial chamber. It has much more purpose than that. And probably in closing on that one, I would say that it's also the most perfectly aligned building to celestial north on the planet, more so than the observatory at Greenwich in London that sets the prime meridian. And interestingly, it has been perfectly aligned for nearly 4,500 years to celestial north. And if the concept of continental drift were true, it would have drifted out of alignment. All right, but it stayed perfectly. It's still to this day the most perfectly aligned building on the planet, but to celestial north, not to the sun, not to this idea of a sun worship of the sun that we see today, but it's oriented to the north. And in closing, Judith, I would say that if there was a crime that you could lay at the feet of what I call the Saturn Death Cult, the ultimate crime, it is the bastardization and the distortion of our weights and measures that allows people to take advantage of the vulnerable. And that greatest distortion, I will always argue, is the lending of money with usury. It is a debt-based financial model.
Yeah. Thank you for these perfect final last words. I really hope you come back, because I would like to touch more in another interview on that cosmological side of what we just talked about, which is also very interesting, but not everything fits into 1 or 2 hours.
No, I'm very grateful, actually. Usually I get 2 hours to talk about both, but I've always felt both sides of the coin are, a couple of hours each at least.
Yeah, exactly. So that was it, guys. Night Flight for today with the wonderful Troy McLachlan. His books, his website, everything will be linked below as usual. And we see you next time. Until then, stay safe and sound out there and enjoy your life. Bye-bye.